Agrawal. I'm the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy Magazine and the host of FP Live, and it's a real pleasure to be here in front of you here today. Can we have a warm round of applause for our panelists? Wow, thank you. Gosh, I need to wake up. Okay, let me just introduce them very quickly. We have His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Kuwaiti. He's the head of cybersecurity for the UAE government. To his left, we have Rachel Elhoos. She's the Director General of RUSI. To her left, we have Helmut Reisinker. He's the CEO for EMEA at Palo Alto Networks. And to his left, we have Jeremy Jurgens. He's the Managing Director at the World Economic Forum, and welcome to all of you to the opening plenary session for the annual meetings of the Global Future Councils and Cybersecurity Summit here today. So our topic here today for the next 50 minutes or so is the new cyber order, cooperation amid turbulence. I'm going to save a little bit of time to bring you in on the conversation. I know all of you are also real experts in this area. On the topic at hand, I think the turbulence part of what we're here to talk about is very clear to all of you. We've just had some good news in the world from Gaza and Israel, but there's no doubt that the world itself has been in a period of really heightened conflict now for several years. And if I were to think about why that is the case, one reason at the very least is that as China's risen as a global power, there's a sense that the old unipolar moment, the era of clear and unfettered American dominance, is giving way to something else. We don't quite know what that something else is, but it's clear that there's sort of change in the air. And with that feeling, you have countries and companies and entities of all sorts jostling for space, jostling for power, jostling for influence. And that sort of jostling, it involves a scramble for everything from energy to critical minerals to human capital. But of course, it also involves the race for dominance in AI and the cyber domain. And so with that backdrop, that's what we're here to talk about in this session. When you have a new sort of cyber order that everyone is jostling over, what does that mean? What is this cyber order? What kinds of rules are there? How do the protectors stay ahead of the attackers? Where does AI fit into this? How do states and companies cooperate to guarantee security? There's so many big questions that we all have on our minds. Thankfully, I don't have to answer them, but we have this great panel here. So let's dive right in. Jeremy, I'm going to start with you. Help us just frame this a little bit. What is a cyber order? Are we in some sort of a new cyber order in the last few years?
Yeah, I would say, thank you, Ravi. I would say we're definitely in a new order here. You spoke to the volatility, you spoke to the challenges. We see this rapid advancement of artificial intelligence. And at the World Economic Forum, when we look at cybersecurity, we say, okay, this is not something that can just be an IT challenge or in the IT department anymore. It actually requires cooperation. It requires interdisciplinary approach. And this is one of the reasons that we actually decided to host the meeting in the UAE this year, alongside our meeting of Global Future Councils. We have assembled, 600 plus global experts across a range of different topics, historians, philosophers, scientists, full range of individuals. And the ability to actually have the cyber experts that are in the room with us today, as well as those following us online, and actually intermix those is actually critically important. And we've all, I think, been amazed at the capabilities of what Gen AI can do, and it's drawing on a wide range of knowledge, data, and so on. So when we think around protecting in this new environment, we have to make sure that we're just as diverse in establishing the defensive mechanisms and approaching it. And I think you mentioned the important word, cooperation. And again, I think being here in the UAE also reinforces that message, because UAE has been a role model as a state, as a nation, in cooperating with its neighbors, with the global community, with business, with academia. And so I think this is something that, not only are we in a new order because of the external context, we have to make sure that we also adapt our approaches when we think about cybersecurity.
That's fantastic. And I think everyone in the audience here, the word you used about a diversity of kind of experiences, you have to tackle the problems in a very interdisciplinary way. So I appreciate that. Dr. Mohammed, you manage the UAE's very impressive cybersecurity operations. Honestly, I'm sure that you see so many threats that people like me do not ever have to know about, and I thank you for that. Are we already in an era of cyber war of sorts?
We are in cyber war, as a matter of fact. And we've seen lately, during all of those conflicts happening across us, be it Ukraine and Russia, be it India and Pakistan, be it Iran and Israel, this only happens in the past 6 months or so. So knowing that that kinetic war kind of faded, if you look at the cyber war, it's actually at least 10, if not 20 times are actually busy doing and trying to either hack, ransomware, wipe, or destroy each other's infrastructures in many of those aspects. And yes, we've seen that. As a matter of fact, UAE was in the middle of many of those attacks and an abuse of many of these infrastructures that we have, were attempts to try do this or that. So many of those are pieces of those cyber warfare indicators. And we are, as a matter of fact, been monitoring that in the past, I don't know how many years, but lately was really exponentially added in many of those aspects.
So can I just layer onto that? In the world of geopolitics, sometimes it's very clear, friends and enemies, you can see them, right?
Definitely.
Much of it is determined by geography, by resources, by what countries want for their national security, et cetera, et cetera. With cyber, it's not so clear to me because geography doesn't matter. It's just murkier. So how do you define who is a friend, who's an enemy?
So I'm sure those expertise in cyber domains will definitely always comes to you and tell you those attributions are really harder to identify. Knowing and having so many data of, again, patterns, behaviors, attacks, ways of actually even coding or playing in those aspects, you will definitely have an indicators, and this is why we mentioned them as an indicators, patterns, TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures that actually ties these type of indicators, these type of pattern to a specific groups. And yes, it's not a nations in that perspective. Always nations are in the back end, but those proxies, those are who are actually really playing and taking the advantage either as a hire in many of those aspects or for whatever other motivations or benefits that they could actually take in that perspective. But yes, we've seen many of those aspects. We have, alhamdulillah, with the great analysis now and the AI aspects, you can, as a matter of fact, look into those traffics, see where is what. And the most important things in the attributions, and that's what we, alhamdulillah, greatly, with the great partners, as a matter of fact, are well known about, it's the partnership. Partnership with the private sector, partnership with the government, and the partnership with those multi-stakeholders in many of those aspects. So if we are interested in that IP address with that timestamp, with that specific payload or checksum or any, you would just follow that accordingly. And alhamdulillah, you will get with those great court orders as well as great multilateral agreements, be it Interpol, Europol, as well as many of the United Nations bodies, helping in actually identifying this. And as a matter of fact, I'm sure you've heard taking down so many infrastructures here and there of ransomware, taking down even some fraudist or many of those. This comes because of that great partnership.
So, Rachel, let me bring you in with your experience at RUSI now, but also your history of working at the DoD. When we think of partnerships, we think of stability. You think of longer-term arrangements between countries. You think of longer-term arrangements between alliances and blocs. And as I said at the start, we're in a moment where everything seems like it's in flux for a number of reasons. A, because of basically tectonic shifts in the rise of the rest, relative decline of the United States, not absolute decline, but relative decline. And then you have in President Trump a leader who is, again, quite willing to throw out the old playbook. From your vantage point as a geopolitical expert, how do you see all of that, the instability of your world, mapping onto the relative stability that Dr. Mohammed was describing in partnerships?
Well, relative stability, I guess everything is relative. So, drawing on my experience mainly in the more conventional defense world, I think you've pointed out something very important, which is we're not, we may call it cyber war, but we don't have a defined battle space. We don't have defined parties to the conflict. We don't have declared hostilities. We're just in this persistent state of disruption and change. And so a lot of the organizations that you alluded to, whether that's the United Nations, that's NATO, that's the European Union, those are not really working anymore because they're large multilateral institutions that were created, decades ago. And they need to adapt to the nature of the threats. So, I can think about the experience in the UK. Even if we went back 10 years ago, something like cyber would have set pretty squarely in the Ministry of Defense with a little bit of cross-governmental cooperation. Now, cyber challenges, they can be economic security. They can be psychological. They can be linked to organized crime. So in terms of the way we need to change these trusted relationships that you've alluded to, we need to, first of all, get much better about working across government and realizing and recognizing where those pressure points are given the nuance of that cybersecurity challenge or that below the threshold challenge that we're dealing with. And then the other aspect is going back to the failure of those large, unwieldy, antiquated multinational systems. We need to offset those by diversifying our relationships. So what we're seeing in the UK, for example, and have done some work on at RUSI, is the power of what we call minilateral relationships, regional relationships that are perhaps more trusted, more understood, and those can be a vehicle to energize cooperation or progress in those multinational bodies. So when we think about norms and standards, let's start with our immediate neighbors or those doing business in our country and kind of create the rules of the road and then build out from there and try to get others to buy on. I take the point on diversity. I mean, we can't just sit off in our corner of the West and make our rules. We need to bring others in and listen to what their concerns are. But I do think if you want to start in that trusted space, maybe some regionalism, minilateralism, cooperation at a state and local level can be used to offset some of the weaknesses at that macro level.
Helmut, you're the CEO for EMEA at Palo Alto Networks. In a world in which countries have to partner with like-minded countries, and then there are clearly other countries that are off limits for them, how does a company act in that kind of a scenario? I mean, yours is very much a global kind of multinational company. You have clients all over the world. How do you think about friendly countries, non-friendly countries?
Well, first of all, we observed that geopolitics has become, you said, relatively stable. It's super dynamic these days. If you just think about the last 6 months on the geopolitical scene. And these things range from impact, because we see that societies are vulnerable when it comes to even election. Look at Romania, who canceled, the Constitutional Court canceled because of obvious TikTok-based manipulation of the electorate. And there were lots of lessons to be learned for cybersecurity as well. And this ranges, I think, this volatile geopolitics mirror, particularly when it comes to critical infrastructure companies or institutions, because they're also part of a society, of an economy, etc. And there we see 3 times more today attacks compared to 2023. And this has accelerated a lot. And now AI comes on top of it that gives another booster into that. This is why, what is true, in the kinetic situation where you need to have good data to know exactly what's going on, you asked about the countries and how do we play with those partnerships, exchanging between the Europols, ourselves, and other interested parties, or the UAE, is extremely important. Same analogy is true for cybersecurity. You need to have good data to protect better your assets that you want to protect, meaning you need to collect telemetry data. It's like in AI, you need to have a lot of data, and then you need to have good data from networks, firewalls, cloud assets, endpoints, to be sure that you can protect your digital essentials well. And in terms of cooperation across countries, we cover the whole world, protecting companies going into many different places. And there, of course, we have to obey to the strict rules that are played there. Europe has different rules when it comes to the AI Act in the United States. Look at California, that has again different rules than another state in the US. Latin America, Brazil, Argentina have pretty similar rules when it comes to data protection than Europe have. So, and UAE again has similar rules. I would call them similar, but not exactly the same.
So I want to put a pin in the idea of rules and just save that for the last 15 minutes of our conversation, because it worries me that if everyone has their own rules, then we're in a world in which the country or region with the weakest rules suffers the most. And so I'd like to know how we normalize all of that. But before all of that, Helmut, just another question. Given that you're very much at the cutting edge of technology, is everything hackable today?
Well, the big D-Day that might be out there is the famous Quantum Day, when quantum crypto could become an issue. This is why we have launched as well post-quantum crypto. We have been part of the standardization body, but that's something that is really something that might be on the horizon. This is why we prepare now, because the big fear is there. People are harvesting data to decrypt later. This is what we're trying to avoid now and protect the people correctly. Now, is everything hackable? I think we have to start from the assumption that maybe somebody has entered already, and then you need to detect very fast. And this cannot be done by having hundreds of thousands of more people. It has to be done by algorithms which are machine learning or AI based, and who are discovering those patterns across the different sources where potential inroads can be. In fact, we see, when I said before, now AI has come into play, there is a big booster, as I said, in terms of the speed of data exfiltration happening. 2 years ago, between time to enter, time to exfiltrate, this was 9 days. Now, on average, it's 1 day, 9 to 1. And in 20% of the cases, it's happening in less than 20 minutes. So you need to have assisted or AI-assisted cybersecurity, ideally on a modular platform that can actually protect you even in that speedy environment.
Dr. Mohammed, do you see AI as the new oil?
AI is a new oil into so many sectors that we have. Yes, sir. And it could change a lot of the way we see and deal with technology. It's not only for the humanity that becomes more convenient. We were speaking about those people of determination and how AI made it easier for them to either hear or see or listen or walk or do so many of those aspects. That's if we care about that healthcare sector. But AI, in our domain for cybersecurity, we always say AI for cyber or cyber for AI, and many of those aspects actually, again, goes into those lines of how we use this AI for the benefit of defending those aspects. In UAE, our national cybersecurity strategy focuses on those 5 pillars, and I'm sure the whole colleagues of mine who actually mentioned those. One of them is partnership. The second is building this technology and really leveraging and using it for the best of the humanity. The third one is the innovation. We need to innovate, not only thinking of those conventional, old type of legacy systems or even teams, but really to come out of this box. Think of those, how to use AI for the benefit from many of those aspects. The fourth pillar focuses on, as a matter of fact, the mission that we are focused on, to protect and defend. And this is in an ethical way, and that's what we are actually really focused on. And the fifth one, since we will be speaking about it at the end, is the governance, the policies.
Okay.
Everybody has those different, definitely, but we need to start, we need to govern, we need to have those legal legislation, procedures, guidelines, you name it, any of those aspects, but for the sake of really using the AI for the best, that's what we are accepting.
So I'm going to come to that at the end, but Jeremy, let me bring you in on this. When I hear this 5-point sort of strategy plan, I don't hear the same kind of quick plan from other cybersecurity experts and ministers in other countries. And given everything Helmut was just describing about the way in which the threats have exponentially gotten more dangerous, I'm really worried about creating a world of haves and have-nots. And even when you layer on partnerships and the ability for bigger, stronger countries to help smaller, weaker countries, you can immediately imagine how a lot of parts of the world would be very left out and extremely vulnerable. From your vantage point, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, maybe first I'd like to share what I'm positive about, because I think that's a really important question. And there's a couple things that we see with this increased focus on AI. One is most organizations are now doing security by design, right? So we're not waiting until after the vulnerabilities have been exposed. If you look at the top foundation model builders, you look at the top creators of AI applications, they're consciously putting AI in by design. They're doing red teaming exercises before release rather than after. They're taking into account a wide range of threats. You spoke to physical infrastructure, critical infrastructure. We also see things like biothreats, bioweapons that become new vectors accessible here. We also see a much greater importance and focus on data. I think for years it's been the case that most organizations overlooked their data strategy. Now that they recognize that with the latest Gen AI tools, intelligence becomes a commodity. So having your own proprietary data becomes one way to be able to differentiate yourself. So I think these are some of the positive areas that we're seeing. Now, we've also seen that scale matters. Scale matters if you're a country. Scale also matters if you're a corporation. And I'm concerned at two layers. One, the haves and have-nots, both among countries, what that looks like, how that plays out. And again, I think we can only approach this through cooperation, through making tools available. This is one of the things we try and do at the forum, is actually provide playbooks, bring a diverse set of actors in. But also matters at the corporate level. And we've discussed supply chain attacks, for example. I think we need to also take into account the full range of small, medium enterprises. How do we make sure that they're protected? What's their role? And we'll need new approaches, and similar to digital public infrastructure for cybersecurity. What are the tools and capabilities that we make available as a kind of public infrastructure to small, medium enterprises and smaller states that don't necessarily have those capabilities? And I think one telltale sign is when you see a political leader or a state government using a Gmail or Hotmail address because they actually have higher confidence in the security of these tools than they necessarily do in their own IT systems that are in place there. So I think this is something that needs to be done through cooperation, through dialogue. But to your point, we are in a world where these kinds of returns to scale exacerbate divides.
Helmut, did you want to jump in there?
No, just what struck me is when you said the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
Which of course calls for, okay, readiness, yes or no, in terms of cybersecurity, policy making, and so on. I would also say there is the have and the have-nots being hacked or not hacked.
Interesting.
Because what we see is, I'm European, that the closer you get to the Ukrainian border, the higher the level of alert is there.
Sure.
And it doesn't depend on size of the country or small country. Actually, we have fantastic cooperation with the Baltic states who have adopted attack surface management just because they are so aware of what it means to have been exposed to an aggressive neighbor in that sense. Same is true for, you might think, well, Africa is on a fast pace now of digitalization. yet there's lots of vulnerabilities. Those that have been already exposed or hacked, for example, when it comes to a critical infrastructure company in Africa, I can tell you they're super alerted. So I would not necessarily correlate in a certain region or size of a country. I would say those who have had the experience, I think, have a way different stance of awareness culturally in the enterprise, in the public institution, in the country, etc. And there, we call for a real holistic approach of cybersecurity, technology-wise, but then also in terms of training. This is in the era of AI, where we see now, we talked a lot in the first ages of digitalization, shadow IT. The same is on the verge of happening now in AI. 40% of the uploads into Gen AI tools in the corporate world will be observed have been done on non-corporate authorized tools. But the youngsters are doing it.
Sure.
So they're leveraging, they want to see the benefit. That's why, once again, you need to have a holistic approach in AI security, not only protecting the LLMs, but also doing red teaming on them and protecting the agents, because the agents will do activities for you for a certain outcome, and you don't want to have the agent diverging completely from what you intended to do.
Rachel, China hasn't come up much in this discussion so far, and I'm curious how you think about how it layers into the cyber question, because you see now with export controls on the highest end chips, they're clearly sort of two or multiple ecosystems. You're either in it or not in it. And then, of course, for all of China's advances, say with EVs or with solar panels, Western countries have such fear of that. There's a sense that, oh, well, there's malware embedded in it or what have you, allegations that the Chinese, of course, will deny. How do you see this sort of world in which there are all these different ecosystems, and if you're a third party, you don't know which, do I go with the American-led ecosystem or the Chinese-led one or an alternate one or a UAE one? How does that play out?
Well, you know, if we look back just 10 years ago, and again, we take the example of the UK, when they were thinking about which operating systems to put in their digital backbone, there was some pretty tough lobbying by the US to try to convince the UK not to embed Huawei in their systems.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of pushback from the United Kingdom saying, you know, you don't know what you're talking about, and you know, let us make these choices ourselves. I think now they're starting to see some of the vulnerabilities, you know, because China, you know, I think this is a strength of theirs. They play the long game. And it's not about tomorrow or now. It's not opportunistic in the cyberspace. It's more about creating that long-term strategic presence in critical infrastructure for varying ends. I mean, it could be industrial espionage. It could be pre-positioning for disruption. It could just be, you know, monitoring and curiosity for their own security needs. But it's much more strategic and long-term and patient. So I don't think I'm in a position to say, you know, you should choose one system over another, because, you know, I think at this point in time, people might also have concerns about the integrity of some of the US-based cloud systems. You see that conversation in Europe where there are real concerns about data privacy, security, you know, personal security if you were to choose a US system. And a lot of people are asking for sovereign cloud and willing to pay for it, and don't want that data integration. So I wouldn't say it's such an easy choice, China versus US versus European system. But you maybe, what you will see is people going after that layering of systems again, so that they know that the most critical elements of their data or certain aspects of critical infrastructure like energy or healthcare are protected more than others. We take some pretty important lessons from Ukraine. I think they've been really smart in terms of cyber resilience. They've worked with international partners and private industry to back up a lot of their most sensitive data and operating systems. And those are the types of lessons that we need to take from them and implement in a world where, you know, I hate to say zero trust, but it really is a situation where you have to be skeptical of all options and take the necessary steps to protect yourself.
Helmut, just with the private sector perspective on the same question. What do you think about countries whose systems you may not fully trust?
Well, we are protecting, I would call it, we are part of Team West, and we are protecting enterprise institutions with their assets against notably notorious aggressive countries, and some of them are east of Europe, I may call it like this. And there, the best thing there again is good cooperation, holistic approach in that sense, but also making sure that in the context of these very dynamic geopolitics, that the rules-based setting is done and creates the right awareness at country level. Give you an example. You mentioned, Rachel, the topic around more sovereign demands, even between US versus Europe, or Europe versus US. We have customers who say, please, it's okay if we use that cloud to run our security services, but I want to control the keys. Fine, that's an option. It's one path to sovereignty. Another path is to say, well, we only do it in a sovereign folder located locally in your different country. That depends on the setting, whether this is an entity that takes care of healthcare sensitive data, whether it's an entity that takes care of because of other local legislation. In that sense, we always have to adapt to make sure that we are correctly responding to the local governance needs. NIS2, for example, across Europe, now an overall legislation that has been put in place and passed by the EU Parliament, now it's being transposed into the different countries with little shades of gray of variance to it. Nonetheless, it will raise the bar in terms of resilience for those critical infrastructure and thus for the societies.
Dr. Mohammed, since you're in government, I'm curious how you think about how individuals can deal with all of these problems. I mean, you know, we all know people who have fallen prey to a hacking attack, you know, whether it's a very simple one on a bank account or someone's credit card is stolen and then their identity is hacked. How do you better prepare citizens for things like that? And where does digital and media literacy fit into that?
This is a very important question, and as a matter of fact, it's the essence of all of the things that we're doing. And we call it the Cyber Pulse. There's an initiative here in UAE. We focused on the culture of cybersecurity, and this is what you need to actually embed in the whole society. It starts from all of those, it's a whole nation approach, as a matter of fact. It starts of all of those sectors, be it in the education sector, be it in the social development sector, be it in the healthcare sectors. All of those sectors need to work together in order to build that cybersecurity culture. And this is, I'll give some examples in that, for example. One of them is the curriculum of many of our education systems, where we added now a new curriculum focused on AI. And in that AI curriculum, there is a whole chapters as well as embedded things in every single chapters about cybersecurity, safety, ethics, security of how you use this AI. And even prior to that, we have a whole, in the computer science as well as in the national type of curriculum, there are some cybersecurity awareness that we actually as well try to actually send it. And imagine this goes from KG1. So not only from that high school, or it goes from that young age of how they're using any of those screens that they could actually use in their devices and build in that perspective. So definitely it's a culture aspects. And the second example is the Cyber Pulse. Cyber Pulse is another initiative where we, as a matter of fact, allow the society to come up with their awareness techniques based on this great lessons learned. Be it they have faced as simple as bullying in the school, or even as simple as a fraud or scams or deep fake or any of those aspects, and they come and they actually share many of this information. We even have a 30 by 30 by 30 program, and this is, it's like 30 leaders says 30 messages in 30 seconds. And this is, since we are actually in the month of October, it's the Cyber Month, and we started that, alhamdulillah, now since the start of October. We have so many great messages from young, old, you name it. They are actually coming to spread that culture. As we go in adapting many of those technologies, as we are actually facing with many of these AIs and new technologies, we need to have that cybersecurity as an embedded things in our DNA. And that's what we are actually, alhamdulillah, here in UAE working based on many of the leadership visions and directions in that aspects. We have conducted one of the largest cybersecurity exercises, nationwide as well as international-wide. We just finished nationwide, where we had all sectors coming together to mimic a cyber attack that happens, again, nationwide, and how every single, be it citizens, be it sectors, be it employees, reacting and really collaborating on that perspective. We conducted one for the whole more than 133 countries, as a matter of fact, in our April and May events, just almost 5 months ago, where we saw 133 countries, representatives coming together, all united under that exercise to focus on one cause and one cause only, to save and build that resiliency in their infrastructure. Some of those scenarios we actually mimicked in that perspective is an attack from an AI, an attack from a machine, an attack from some adversaries we don't know about, or even some of AI's machine goes rogue, goes actually in building their own ways of attacking. It was really very beneficial, and again, great partners helped us in doing that. And it was really one of the essential things where you see everybody coming there. And this is where you saw Russian just sitting in, beside Ukrainian, Indian, as well as Pakistan, Israel were there, as well as Iran. So everybody was in that place. If you see that really event, it was really amazing how everybody was working technically to send the message of resiliency. Securing our infrastructure is the red line, and that's what we're actually working on.
I want to move us, I really wish all countries had the ability to do some of what you're describing, but I want to move us now finally just to a sense of the rules that could govern cybersecurity globally. There's a real sense right now in geopolitics that, you know, we're a country to break laws. You know, there's no clear punishment. There's no clear enforcement mechanism for it, and that's why we have as many conflicts ongoing as we do. What should a global infrastructure for rules around cybercrime look like, and who enforces the rules? Jeremy, would you like to try and take a stab at that, or if there are any sort of ideas in that space that you can direct us to?
Yeah, I think this is actually very challenging. If we just go back to realpolitik, I think you have to actually recognize that independent of whatever rules that might be set, in the cybersecurity domain, you have to assume that you're always vulnerable, that those attacks can come from any direction, even potentially groups that you assumed were friendly or otherwise. And yes, we need rules to facilitate the smooth operations of the systems, but I think this is also a world where, you know, as Annie Grove would say, only the paranoid survive. But if we do come back, I want to actually touch on this also aspect of sovereignty. I think we're using a political term and trying to apply it to a techno-economic concept.
Explain that.
Right, so sovereignty, you say, okay, we have complete control over everything that happens in our domain. If you were to use this in economic terms, you would call it autarky. And I don't know who's arguing for AI autarky or digital autarky, like we're going to do everything on our own. So there's really a continuum here. And the question is, how far do you go? Most states, and I'd argue even the Chinese and the US, would have difficulty achieving true sovereignty over their full supply chain, right?
Yeah.
Zeiss lenses made in Germany, polysilicon processed, you know, energy intensive, ASML, TSMC, NVIDIA, et cetera. So it's a very complex supply chain. So you almost have to start by acknowledging that complexity and then saying, okay, where do we make the trade-offs in that space? Now, just in the same way that you don't need to build your own airplanes to get the benefits of aviation, You don't have to have your own frontier models. You don't have to build your own chip foundries to get the benefits of AI and digital capabilities. But you still need to have regulations, right? So if someone wants to enter the airspace, you say, well, if you want to act in our country, you need to abide by our rules. And so you can put checks and balances in place. You measure for outcomes rather than trying to assume for control. So I think we have to be careful not to apply the wrong analogies and the wrong metaphors to our policy frameworks and take it from a position of realpolitik, acknowledge the trade-offs, and assume continuous vulnerability and act accordingly.
That's a really smart answer. Helmut, jump in.
I like what you say about realpolitik, being pragmatic in this very dynamic world. What I mean by that is value is created by cooperation. And of course, it is known that Europe is a very strong advocate for a rules-based economic model. And therefore, if you are cooperating, which means you cross borders, you cross systems, that's why you need to have a holistic approach, because exploitation can happen from anywhere. And
rules are necessary.
And rules are necessary.
They're
Now, I think we should not dream that there will be one cyber governing body and this will be done, and once we have settled it down in a kind of constitution, everybody will adhere to, and it will be fixed forever. That's a dream, and it will not happen. We need to be pragmatic. I think much more of these bilateral or multilateral exchanges to make sure that there is a knowledge sharing about what are the patterns that we are seeing and how can we go about it. One thing we have not yet discussed, we had, when you talk about enterprises, we had always talked about the IT world and the OT world, connected machines. Now, with AI comes another term of machine, which is called the agent, who will create an outcome for you to whom you delegate, dear agent, you do this, you book my flight to here and there. In the future, there will be, for every human identity, there will be about 80 machine-based identity. So that's a whole new plethora of potential inroads. And therefore, I believe one needs to really go about real-time cybersecurity, having effective sharing of practices, knowledge, private, public, law enforcement together, and then calling as well for what we call a platform approach, because like in AI, you get good outcomes if you have a lot of data, good data, and then you have the right models on it. Same is true for cybersecurity. If you have good telemetry data, a lot of it, you're watching and permanently scanning the internet also, and then you apply the algorithms for it. So I think having one constitution around cyber governance, that's a dream. It's more this realpolitik, the pragmatic cooperation to make sure that we apply the same thing across private and public sectors and countries.
I want to make sure that I use some of the wisdom in this room. If there's anyone who has a question, do raise your hand and I'll make sure a mic gets to you. Anyone? I have lots of questions of my own, so I can keep going. You're very shy. Okay, I see one hand there. Okay, sir, let's get a mic over to the front row. In fact, I'll take two questions together, both in the front row. There's a lady there in white and a gentleman there. Let's do the lady first if we can, and then the gentleman. We'll take them together.
Good morning.
Try again. Yep.
Good morning. This is Hura Al-Khazemi. I am leading a Center for Emerging Tech in NYU, Vice Provost of Research, Research Entrepreneurship in the university. My question, it's always an economic game for people who are exploiting systems and resilience on the global frontier. How can we make it an economic gain for people who are building for cybersecurity, the economics of cybersecurity when it's not on the attack side, but when it's as well in the defense and the build-up side? That's it.
Okay, thank you. We'll mull on that. And sir, you.
Hi, this is Akhilesh from KPMG. Fantastic discussion. I believe that the AI will help the bad actors before it starts helping the good actors or the defenders, because the good actors have to deal with regulation, cooperation, all the governance, etc., etc. How do we fast track so that we don't get fallen behind in the race where the bad actors are using AI far more effectively and efficiently?
That's a great question as well. Any of you would like to take on either of those?
couldn't quite hear the first.
The first question was difficult to
It
understand.
was a bit difficult to understand. Could
I can repeat if you can hear my microphone.
yes, please.
The first question was that how do we make it economically incentivized for people to build capabilities and systems? Was that the question? Yeah.
I think that's right. Perfect.
I mean, I'm happy to say
Jump in.
something on that one because I think we see that happening in real time. Up until now, the interplay between government and the private sector has been a little bit of, well, it's not my responsibility, it's your responsibility, and the cost should be on you. I think we need to change that mindset, so investing in security by design or resilience by design is seen as a shared responsibility. So on the one hand, the government is being sure to bring the private sector into scenario-based planning. It's sharing intelligence and information so that when designers are trying to create that resilience in the systems, they can do it in a way that is cost-effective. Conversely, government also has to provide the incentives, and that could be co-financing in some cases to try to make sure that there is this determination to build that resilience in up front. But right now, I think we're talking past each other a little bit.
Helmut?
I think creating an incentive is to combine cybersecurity protection plus business incentive. What we are trying to do, and this is how we think it's to be done in terms of re-architecting cybersecurity, is given the fact that cyber in most of your institutions, companies, organizations is a very fragmented estate. Typically, a large global organization is using 32 different tools to protect your digital essential. What we are saying is, if you platformize that and you define the steps and the speed how you do it, but you get better security outcomes because you cover everything from firewalls, networks, cloud, endpoints, whatever, and you then get also the business benefits. Concrete example, a global semiconductor manufacturer that you probably all have heard of, critical infrastructure as you can guess. They had 4 players just in network security. We've platformized this to 1. So better security, but also better economic outcome. Given the scarcity of skills anyway and high degree of automation, this will help a lot. And to combine it as well with a lady CIO as a feedback where we implemented a security operations center solution, there were 2 key feedbacks. One was, we have underestimated the degree of automation that is possible today. And the second feedback was, when I come to my SOC, you know what the nice thing is? My people are smiling again. Because they can focus on the relevant topics and are not in the treadmill of just copying for something where machines are better to support you in defending.
We have about a minute left, Dr. Mohammed. I'm going to give you the last word because that second question was basically, how do the good guys stay ahead of the bad guys? You have to deal with regulations, rules, all kinds of things and hurdles.
Yes.
The bad guys don't.
That's a nice question. Thank you very much for this. And that's what we face, as a matter of fact, in a daily basis. And this goes into all of those pillars of our national cybersecurity, for example. We need definitely partnership. We need to partner and see those indicator of compromises, those best practices, those lessons learned from everybody in order to enhance our things, because attackers sometimes comes from all different type of, locations, places, and they have different ways of actually targeting or actually perpetrating against specific infrastructures. Then there is always an importance of changing the mindset, thinking out of the box, thinking like an attacker. And this is some of the things that we do in many of those aspects as well, trying to actually run many of those simulations, hackathons, and another third one is our bug bounty program, that where we actually see how they think, how they find any of those 0 days or even ways of actually attacking a system in that perspectives. So incentivizing those white hat hackers and really building that community of those, this will always help us. And as a matter of fact, there are a program of this and helping those in order for us to help ourselves, protecting those aspects. And again, legal and governance is one of the major things that we are really working on. There is a concept of deterrence. In the usual thing, there is the mutual assured destruction. Where is in the cyber? What could be happen in the cyber that someone, if he commits something, he will be really penalized in that aspects. There is no Geneva Convention. We spoke about that Cyber Geneva Convention as well in many of those aspects. We don't see that from that. Again, big bodies and governings and entities who could actually come in that perspective. Private sector themselves. By the end of the day, if that attacker is going to attack something, he will use something that is belong to that private sector, be it a cloud-based, be it somewhere a system here and there, or be it something that he developed. By the end of the day, he need to run it into a specific aspect. So we need the help of that private sector who could actually come really in a proactive measures, help us in early detecting any of those attacks. So all of these comes together in order to really reach to that level. At least if there is a quick win nowadays, we should collaborate with every entity, every country, every private sectors without no policies, or we need to sign this agreement, we need to sign this MOUs, we need to sign this or that. Let's share for the good. That's what we always call it. So.
That's a great note to end on. We have to think like attackers, but not be attackers.
Exactly.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being a great audience and for your questions. I wish you an amazing and informative and enlightening annual general meeting. Let's have a round of applause for our panelists, please.
Thank you.